Hello everyone. This is Srafil Musa from Etenawag speaking. I would like to say welcome to our webinar today on how to conduct a good literature review. This is the second session from the research webinar series that's being organized by Etenawag in collaboration with Roha Health and Ethiopian Society of Internal Medicine. Yeah, the first session was presented by Dr. Lydia on epidemiological study designs, and today we have our guest speaker, Dr. Henok, and also our research team lead from it in our team on how to conduct a good literature review. So till everyone joins, I think it would be wise if we use the time. I would like to say a few things about Yetenawag. Yeah, Yetenawag is a volunteer network digital health platform, and what do you mean by that? I will explain it as we go along. Currently, it's a full volunteer network. We have more than 70 active volunteer members working in this awesome association we have, and we have members from at least 5 different countries, and we're trying to add more. Generally, we have 4 aspects that we work on as a team, and these 4 parts of our work would be health promotion, community engagement, mentorship and skill sharing, and medical education. And under these sections, we also have different projects that are currently being conducted. Of course, we want to be more than a digital health platform. These are some of the pictures for our community engagement. This was the last time we had an event, Health and Art exhibition at Addis Ababa. To say a few things about the project, one of it is the Yet Enawag with Roha Health Article Writing Competition in collaboration with IMSA. So this was the third round of Health Article Writing Competition organized this year, and from in collaboration with Roha Medical Campus. The top 20 winners were rewarded with Littmann stethoscope, and the top 3 were also given rewards, and top 5 winners get internship at Roha and other partner institutions like Ministry of Health. And this was the pictures from the last 2 year winners again. So the other program that we have is the Yet Enawag Research Fellowship in collaboration with the Roha, Tukur Ambassa, and St. Paul. So we started on March 14th last year with Addis Ababa University. We had 3 departments that were participating with us, oncology, radiology, and internal medicine. And the plan was to give grant to the winners. And from the research fellowship at Tukur Ambassa, we had our 4 winners, Dr. Abel, Dr. Nathnael, Dr. Howie, and Dr. Tigist were the awarded physicians. And also the second phase is continuing with St. Paul Medical College. That one is focused on undergraduate interns who are doing their individual research, and the winners will be announced soon, and the next phase of the research program will continue. The other thing we work on is our continuous medical education, our CME. You might be familiar with it. We have held 30 CMEs so far, and this year we plan to do 28, and we have only hosted 3 now. So we have 25 left to go. We invite renowned local and international speakers, and each session would have at least 2 CU points to be rewarded for those people who score 50 and above with our quiz. We have a partnership with Ethiopian Medical Association, Ethiopian Society of Cardiac Professionals, Ethiopian Society of Internal Medicine, and we try to expand that. Currently, our webinars focus on almost as vast as topics as medicine can go. Any of our sessions, not just our CMEs, but our research, our mentorship program, you can find every video we have since it's recorded on our YouTube channel. We will send you the link tree later on. You can find it in the chat. You can also get updates about our every session we have on our Telegram channel, social media posts, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. As far as the certification goes, I was seeing questions in the chat box. Yes, this session will have a CPD point, a CU point, but there are certain criteria you need to fulfill to get those points. The first one is you need to attend the whole session virtually. At least minutes attended will be checked by our team, and you need to attend most of the event for you to be certified. And the second is you have to fill the Google form for personal details and attendance, and also score 50% and above on our post-webinar quiz we will have today. So if you have any question anytime, you can ask. Before we continue, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, team member, mentor, Dr. Henok. Dr. Henok is a principal teaching fellow in public health at Imperial College in London. Dr. Henok leads modules related to research methods and health policy analysis. In this session, we will aim to draw from literature and experience of reviewing research articles, especially student dissertations, to outline the key attributes of writing a very good academic paper and how to critically evaluate them. It's an interesting session. Doctor, the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Surafel. በጣም አመሰግናለሁ. Really, thank you. And welcome everyone. Really delighted to see about 60 people in the room on a Friday evening. So shows all your dedication. I'm really delighted. So the session for today is literature review. Right? So it's usually understated, but quite a critical stage in the research process. The idea for today is more of to outline some of the learnings and the lessons that I have accumulated over the years in terms of teaching research methods for the last 8 or so years on our postgraduate program at Imperial College London. Undertaking my own research, evaluating student papers. So more of necessarily አዲስ እውቀትም ሳይሆን more of tips, what are the good lessons, the good practices የሚለውን ነገር ነው አድሬስ ለማድረግ የምሞክረው. And I appreciate that there will be a number of people with a lot of research experience in the room. So if you think differently on some of the things I might say, or if you have an additional point to contribute, please, you're very welcome to contribute at any point through the chat or to raise your hand and share with that. እና በእንደዚህ አይነት መንፈስ ነው የምንቀጥለው. So at first, I would like to share my screen and hopefully have you answer a few questions through Mentimeter. Okay, so the question is, what is the main objective of the literature review chapter of your article ሊሆን ይችላል ወይንም ደግሞ your dissertation ሊሆን ይችላል, any piece of research that you have done, and what do you take as the main aim of that section? Okay, good. What has been done so far to understand the subject, to give a background, all very good answers. Formulate hypothesis, very good. Identify gaps and establish need, which is another very good answer. To know strengths and weaknesses, I hope you would elaborate on that, but still very good answer. Situate our own research, perfect. Summarize existing knowledge, very important, right? And a common pitfall is to be too descriptive, describing the research one by one. So-and-so said this, and so-and-so said this, and to go into a more descriptive role. But it's very important to summarize aptly and provide an overview. Gathering knowledge, the gathering knowledge የሚለውን አይነት, that's what I want to kind of distill ማድረግ የምንፈልገው እንትን እሱ ነው. Gathering knowledge about what, right? What's the drive within your literature review approach የሚለው በጣም important ይሆናል, and that becomes your research question, right? Gathering knowledge not about everything about that topic, but things strictly related to your research question. Methodological guidance, interesting, ጥሩ ነው, and it can be a part of that. So that's all really good answers. Problem statement, በጣም ጥሩ. Consensus እና knowledge ያለባቸውን ኤሪያዎች እንትን ለማድረግ to prevent redoing the research ይመስለኛል redoing reinventing the wheel duplicate ማድረግን avoid ለማድረግ ነው በጣም ጥሩ ነው summarize what's covered okay I wanted to ask a couple of people maybe methodological guidance ያላችሁት someone if you can raise your hand and elaborate on that would be really interesting compare past studies የሚለውም if you're happy to raise your hand and elaborate that would be brilliant ለሚቀጥለውም ሴሽናችን ይጠቅመናል but I want to hear what how you would explain those things if you are able to so compare past studies የሚለው ከምን አንፃር compares የምናደርገው የሚለውን ሼር ማድረግ የሚችል ሰው ካለ would be በጣም አሪፍ or any one of ከተባሉት ነገሮች if there is someone who would like to raise their hand and give their opinion on how critical this literature review step is and what they feel is its utility please to speak up
Excuse me, Dr. Enoch. We've unfortunately turned off that feature. Our attendees cannot directly speak to the guest speaker or to the panelists.
Okay.
So, but they can share their answers in the chat box. And
yeah, okay. No worries. Already this is, thank you, Surafel. This is already good. Okay, great. So let's get back to our slides, but all really very comprehensive. እኔም ከዚህ ውጪ ምለው ነገር almost የለኝም ግን more of ከልምድ ምን ላይ ነው ተማሪዎች ብዙ ጊዜ ስህተት የሚፈጥሩት ተደጋጋሚ ነገር የሚያደርጉት በምን አይነት መልኩ ማሻሻል ይቻላል የሚሉትን ነገሮች ግን እንትን ለማድረግ የራሴን ልምድና ኢንሳይት አንዳንድ ሜቶዶሎጂካል ቴክስቶች የሚሉትን ነገር ሼር ላደርጋችሁ ሞክራለሁ so I'll just stop sharing now and how to write a literature review right so really practical የሆነውን ቻሌንጅ ስናስበው መጀመሪያ ላይ envision ስናደርገው more linear የሆነ ፓዝ ነው የሚመስለን አሁን እዚህ ጋር እንደምናየው ግን በጣም ተመዝማዛ ነው those of you who've completed a literature review task recently I think would relate to this more readily ብዬ አስባለሁ so ያንን መንገድ ናቪጌት የማድረጊያ ስልቶችን ነው አሁን የምንነጋገረው ማለት በጣም ብዙ ልፋት ይጠይቃል literature review usually article ጋር ስትሄዱ it ends up being something like 1200 1400 words ነው በጣም ብዙ ከለፋችሁ በኋላ ዲስቲል አድርጋችሁ ማቅረብ ያለባችሁ so ልፋቱ ብቻ ዋጋ የለውም packaging it organizing it in a way that's readable and impactful is an important aspect so this is the main thing we've done it so a common thing is so you start reading a paper right and you kind of say oh okay so I've finished reading it and you could end up spending so much time you could end up spending so much time methodical ካልሆናችሁ በጣም frustrating የሆነ እንትን ነው process ነው የሚሆነው እና በተለይ you know you come across an interesting piece of paper and we have what we call student drift you drift from your original discipline ሆናችሁ ካታሎግ እያደረጋችሁ ኢንፎርሜሽኑን የማትሰበስቡ ከሆነ በቃ በራይቲንጉ እየተወሰዳችሁ በታንጀንሻል በሆኑ ኢንትረስቲንግ ነገሮች እየተሳባችሁ you go into different other areas እና ያንን avoid ማድረግ በጣም አስፈላጊ ነው so how we're going to cover today is to talk about you know the importance of focusing on the research objective right developing good objectives that would keep you disciplined in your review and what are some helpful structures for organizing your writing and avoiding being too descriptive right? So you have to describe the literature to some extent. You have to provide an overview. You have to describe things, but there needs to be some critical evaluation that comes through. Otherwise, it becomes less interesting and less impactful. And then the way you reference, but looking at the requirements from journals, how should you properly reference your review? But important. እነሱን ለማየት እንሞክራለን። So a good literature review lays out research done by others that is relevant to your research objective. This is so important, right? So it's not just summarizing literature in a given area, on a given topic, more generally ሳይሆን more intimately linked to your research objectives. You need to be very clear about that. አለበለዚያ እንደዚህ ቪር እያደረጋችሁ ዳይግሬስ እያደረጋችሁ የመሄድ ሪስክ አለው። It presents work of others in a logical sequence. Okay? This is another important aspect. እዚህ ጋር እስቲ ጥያቄ ልጠይቅና በቻት ላይ መመለስ ትችላላችሁ። What are some of the ways that you would achieve logical sequence? How would you organize the literature you uncover to give your section some logical sequence? ምን አይነት ፓራሜትሮች organize ልታደርጉት ትችላላችሁ? So maybe your literature review might include something like 25 or 30 key studies. እነዛን ስተዲዎች ኦርደር ስታስይዟቸው እና ሎጂካል ሲኮንስ ስትሰጧቸው በምን አይነት መልክ ኦርጋናይዝ ልታደርጓቸው ትችላላችሁ? Okay, global to local is good. General and then specific is good. General to specific, quite okay. It's good. Latest to oldest, very good, because time በተለያየ ምክንያት ዝም ብሎ not for the sake of chronological order ሳይሆን ብዙ ጊዜ ወይ የፖሊሲ ቼንጅ ይኖራል ወይ የፕራክቲስ ቼንጅ የቴራፒ ቼንጅ ይኖራል እንደምታጠኑት ነገር. So that could be insightful. So time of publication again ከዛ አኳያ can be important. What else? Quality of research type. I wish on quality of research type, Nolawi, if you were able to share with us can talk then እስቲ እዚሁ ላይ unpack ለማድረግ ብትሞክር would be interesting. What aspect of quality can help you give it a structure? Methodology, again, confirm Michael, please. Methodology, in what sense? Like ምን አይነት በምን አይነት ሜቶዶሎጂዎች የተለያየ ፓራግራፍ ልትሰጣቸው ትችላለህ? Right? Okay, based on study thoughts, very interesting. So it could even be that it's based on the type of conclusion they have arrived at a common topic. That could be it. Okay, perfect. Great, Nolawi. So there's this thing that we call the hierarchy of evidence, Nolawi እንዳለው ስለዚህ you would prioritize your systematic reviews, especially meta-analysis የተሰራባቸውን ስራዎች more experimental studiዎችን cover ማድረግ ከዛ በኋላ ወደ observational studies ከዛ ወደ case reports የመሳሰለው global to local የሚለውን በጣም ጥሩ ነው። እሱ ጋር አንዲት የምንሰራት ኤክሰርሳይዝ አለች፣ እሱንም እናያለን። ግን ከዛ ባሻገር ደግሞ we do have what we mean by a background section and a literature review section, right? ስለዚህ አሁን ብዙ ጊዜ ወደ ጆርናል ስትልኩ ፔፐር ምንድን ነው የሚሆነው? እንዳለ በአንድ ኢንትሮዳክሽን ሴክሽን ውስጥ ሊጠቃለል ይችላል። ግን that would still have your background section and then you would have your literature review section. If you're working on your dissertation, these are clearly demarcated as background, right? Background to the topic or to the study, and then your literature review. Is there someone who can tell me what the difference between the two is? What's the difference between the background section and the literature review section? Okay, could be የፎርማት ዲፍረንስ ሊኖር ይችላል from school to school. Great. Tandese, thank you. General knowledge about the topic is the background, right? I will take that. So usually you are required to start more broadly. So here background የምንለው section ይሄ ሌሎች በእኔ በኢንትረስትድ በሆንኩት ነገር ላይ ምን ሰሩ ከሚለው ነገር ባሻገር ያለውን why is this issue important to begin with, right? ስለዚህ that's where you bring your epidemiological data on the issue, magnitude of the problem, WHO ምንድን ነው የሚለው, institutions ምንድን ነው የሚሉት, how widespread is the problem, the policy importance and everything, right? Now, so background ያንን establish ያደርጋል, right? እነዚህን key facts እንደተባለው ቅድም. Great, Tashagar. So the literature review then has to progressively focus on your research question, right? Right? So the literature review, so መጀመሪያ ላይ background አጠቃላይ የኢሹን magnitude የፖሊሲ ላንድስኬፑን የመሳሰለ ነገር cover ታደርጉበትና you're basically arguing for why you've picked this topic to be important within your background. ከዛ በኋላ when you come to your literature review, you're intimately presenting the evidence to do with your aim or your research question. Okay, so there you have to be very disciplined. Another distinguishing aspect is within the background, you could have different types of evidence being mobilized, right? Yeah, institutional report, the WHO, yeah, Ministry of Health, other institutions, pressure groups, የተለያየ የሚሉትን ነገር why this is important ካቀረባችሁ በኋላ 1 or 2 paragraphs. Then when you go to your literature review, it's usually peer-reviewed, published literature. Of course, gray literature ይካተታል, ግን on the main, you look at the evidence. Okay, I really wanted to highlight that because there's usually a confusion. You might start by እንደዚህ ሰርኩላር የሆኑ አርጊመንቶች ውስጥ ኢንጌጅ የማድረግ ፒትፎል ዩዥዋሊ የተማሪዎች ፒትፎል ነው. You start invoking the evidence, you go to the background, you go back to the evidence. It can be very confusing, right? ይሄንን ግን ልክ እንደ ፋነል you start from a broader description of the issue, of why it's important, of who is the key stakeholder, who is saying what. ከዛ በኋላ ማግኒቱድን ኤስታብሊሽ ካደረጋችሁ በኋላ and then you talk about strictly about other studies done strictly in line or in view of your research question. Thank you for the participation. Really interesting and excellent contributions. So ሌላኛው ያልነው ነገር ምንድነው? Evidence of in-depth critical evaluation, right? So important, and we'll see how you can show that. Okay, the literature review is an analytical exercise. እንትን አይደለም, like you're not just providing a nice essay summary. It's actually an analytical የሆነ exercise ነው. በዛም ሜጀር ትደረጋላችሁ. So you have weighting መስጠት አለባችሁ. ቅድም እንደተባለው the more powerful የሆኑት ኤቪደንሶች, the more strong የሆኑትን ኤቪደንሶች እንዴት ነው ትሪት የምታደርጉት? Like so and so et al said this, so and so et al said this እያሉ ዝም ብሎ ማቅረብ ሳይሆን you should actually selectively nuanceን understand ማድረግ. When you're presenting a systematic review, you should actually mention that it's a systematic review. right? አንዳንዴ ደግሞ ናሽናል ቢግ የሆኑ ስተዲዎች ሲካሄዱ you should mention that because that has more weight. When it's a prospective study, እሱ more weight ስላለው depending on your research question, እሱንም መጥቀስ ያስፈልጋል፣ sample size-ን መጥቀስ ያስፈልጋል, right? So here, when I say strengths and limitations እና ይሄ critical in-depth evaluation ስንል at every turn እያንዳንዱን study describe ማድረግ አይደለም. That becomes very difficult to read. ግን ልክ meaningful የሆኑ ቦታዎች ላይ እንትኑ የሚመጣበትን like እነዚህ ኢንፎርሜሽኖች ኤንሃንስ የሚያደርጉት ኮንቨርሴሽኑን ኤንሃንስ የሚያደርጉት ቦታ ላይ እነዛን ዲፕሎይ እያደረጉ መሄድ በቃ በጣም ሪፋይን ያደርገዋል ስራውን። you know, so whoever is reading it goes away not just with some descriptive narration but more አለ አይደለ በቃ እንትኑን ማግኘት ይችላል ማለት ነው። okay, like የኤሪያው as a whole, the field የቱ ጋር ነው ድክመቱ? The field would have limitations as a whole, right? So it might be a preponderance of cross-sectional studies, right? So you would show that as you go along. ከዛ summary paragraph ብዙ ጊዜ ተማሪዎች እንትን የሚሉት ምንድነው ያቺ መጨረሻ ላይ የሊሚቴሽኑን ሳመራይዝ የሚያደርግ ፊልዱን ሊሚቴሽን ሳመራይዝ የሚያደርጉበት ፓራግራፍ ስላለች ይሄ ኢንተግሬትድ የሆነውን ናሬቲቭ ሚስ አውት ያደርጋሉ. And that's not good practice. So as you go along, taking you know the reader on a vicarious journey ይባላል, you know, so something ለእናንተ የታያችሁን ነገር like think of it as holding the hand of your reader and navigating the landscape. When you navigate the landscape, you're showing them, oh, on these aspects, on these variables, we've got actually quite strong evidence. There are systematic reviews, there are high-powered randomized controlled trials, there are prospective studies, there are this, there are that. ትላላችሁ ከዛ ደግሞ ለምሳሌ ያፈነገጠ ሪዛልት ያለው አንድ ሁለት ስተዲ ሊኖር ይችላል, right? አሁን ያኔም you should be conscious that the reader would ask questions there, right? ሌላው ኤቪደንስ በጠቅላላ there is no effect እያለ at some point አንድ ሁለት ወይም ሶስት ፔፐሮች አይ there is evidence የሚሉ ከሆነ what happens? You would go in and say, oh yes, but these are small studies. Oh yes, but ብላችሁ not necessarily in a negative way ግን qualify ማድረግ ያስፈልጋል. Okay. There is a question. I want to spend more time on that question afterwards. Okay. ከዛ በኋላ ቅድም መልስ ላይ ሃይፖቴሲስ ቢልድ ለማድረግ ነው የሚል ነገር አይተናል. Quite right. ስለዚህ you know, as you're writing your literature review, you're basically outlining emerging issues and questions. What you're preparing, what you're essentially preparing the reader is to understand your research, to justify your research question, right? Statement of the problem የምንለው ማለት ነው, or otherwise usually nowadays rational የሚባለው statement, right? So አሁን እኛ ጋር ተማሪዎቹ ምንድን ነው የምንላቸው? At the end of your literature review, you should have 3 bullet points for why you would undertake your proposing this research question. 3 bullet points, no more. And usually you can be succinct in this. አለበለዛ if you continue to add more and waffle, and then the key important information gets lost in the detail, right? ስለዚህ አንደኛው justification ለምሳሌ rational justification could come from the background section because the magnitude of the problem is huge, or there has been a recent issue, or there are marginalized communities affected, so it becomes a health equity issue. There are a number of host of issues implied. ከነሱን summarize አድርጋችሁ በአንድ። ሁለተኛው ደግሞ could be because የተሰሩት ስተዲዎች እስከዛሬ you know, small sample size ያላቸው ነው, so you've got this opportunity to synthesize this national data set, so you could include that, you know, methodology advantage. ሌላኛው ደግሞ could be that certain variables have not been included. Or ሌላኛው ምን ሊሆን ይችላል? Another could be that a lot of the studies might not have been guided by theoretical models. So you might be incorporating some theoretical models to test and things like that. So እሱላ important ነው ግን aim for having 3 or 4 bullet points at the end of your literature review that you can state as the rationale for your study. አንዳንድ ሴክሽኖች አሉ where less is more, right? አሁን አንዳንድ እንትኖችን ሃይላይት ለማድረግ ፔፐር ስናርም እና ሪቪው ስናደርግ ከሴንት ፖልም ተማሪዎች ኮመን የሆነ እንትን ብለን ያየነው አንደኛው ነገር ምንድን ነው? ይሄ ረዥም የሆነ ስቴትመንት ኦፍ problem repetition across the background section, the literature review section, and then the statement of the problem section, right? አሁን እንደዛ ሲሆን it becomes too long, it becomes confusing and so forth. So as you go down to the rational section and down more concise እየሆነ ነው መምጣት ያለበት. By then you should be clear. By then you should be clear and it should be pinpoint እነዚህ ነገሮች ናቸው የሚሰሩት. And then you need to cite the relevant sources properly, right? So cites in ሲደረግ አሁን የእኔም ኢትዮጵያ ተማሪ ነበርኩኝ የሄልዝ ኦፊሰር ዲግሪ ደቡብ ዩኒቨርሲቲ ስንጨርስ የሰራነውም ሪሰርች ነበረ። ከዛ በኋላ በስራም ዓለም እያለሁኝ ስሰራና አካዴሚያ ውስጥ አሁን ደግሞ ስሰራ ያለው የሪኳየርመንት ልዩነት አለው። አሁን ጆርናል ላይ ፐብሊሽ ለማድረግ ስትፈልጉ አካዴሚያ ውስጥ ፕሮግረስ ለማድረግ ስትፈልጉ እያንዳንዷ የምታመጧት ነገር ሳይት መደረግ አለባት። ሶ ቴንደንሲ ምንድነው? ለምሳሌ ተከታታይ ሴንቴንሶች ስለሆኑ መጨረሻ ፓራግራፉ ላይ ሳይት አደርጋለሁ የሚል ቴንደንሲ አለ። that is wrong, right? You should not confuse the reader whether the statement that you've said is yours or አይዲያውን ከሌላ ቦታ ከሌላ ሶርስ ያመጣችሁት፣ right? ሳይት ካላደረጋችሁ ምንድነው የሚሆነው? ኮንፊውዥን ነው የሚፈጠረው። ስለዚህ to avoid any confusion because የሳይቴሽን እና የሬፈረንስ ኢሹ የእንትንም ኢሹ አለው፣ የፕላጃሪዝም ኢሹ አለው፣ የአውቴንቲሲቲ የኦሪጂናሊቲ ኦፍ ወርክ ኢሹ አለው and it actually confuses the message. Okay. So how much citation is allowed on the literature review, as we are going to leave some of the discussion part. So how would you know what to put on the discussion and literature review in terms of the weight of articles? Really good question, right? Almost በቃ ለራሳ የምችለው ማንሳት የምፈልገውን ነገር ስላነሳችሁልኝ ነው anonymous attendee. So yeah, so this is a dilemma, right? Because if you've done your literature review really well, your discussion section automatically becomes easy to execute, right? Because what happens in the discussion section? You are going back to the literature and you're situating your findings in view of the existing literature, right? So let's see. አሁን እዚህ ጋር የተጠየቀው ጥያቄ ምንድነው? Okay, these are the same studies. I would exhaust them here and then I would have to discuss them again in the discussion. What do I do? That's a really good question. Now, literature review guard, you should do whatever is necessary to justify your research question. Your literature review ends up being more comprehensive than your discussion section. When you come to your discussion section, selectively ነው ከሊትሬቸር ሪቪው ይደገማል literature ምንም ችግር የለውም። But the way you discuss it, of course, is going to be different, right? ከእንደገና you're not just discussing, you're not just describing or summarizing the evidence there. You're actually saying, I found this, but so and so have also found it. Or I found this, so and so haven't found it, and the difference is this. They have a stronger evidence-based or weaker or whatever. ስለዚህ literature review ላይ absolutely be comprehensive and you could also, there's also always the chance to go back and revise your literature, sharpen your literature review. አንዳንድ ሊትሬቸር ሪቪውስ ደግሞ በፊት ሊታዩ የማይችሉ ግን ቤዝድ ኦን ኢምፕሊኬሽን ኦፍ ዮር ፋይንዲንግስ አዳዲስ እንትኖች ደግሞ ታስገባላችሁ ዲስከሽኑ ላይ። ስለዚህ እሱ ኢትስ አ ኮንሰርን but that's how you would address it. I hope that's clear. Okay, so how do you lay out research then by others that is relevant to your research question? Avoid student drift, right? So you could be drifting into a related but not a core area. When you're writing, and it's when I was doing my PhD, but I'm in supervisor, this is a story I like telling. But post-it note, desktop ላይ እንትን ላይ ስክሪን ላይ ለጥፈው ይሉኝ ነበረ ኤም ኤንድ ኦብጀክቲቭ right? It's very common. Drift is very common. Like በተለይ አንዳንድ ኦተሮች አጻጻፋቸውን በጣም ይማርካል and you could be taken away. ስለዚህ እነሱን ነገሮች እሱን በጣም መጠንቀቅ ያስፈልጋል. And when you write, whatever you write, especially proofread ስታደርጉ, why is this here, right? Why have I included it here? Always know that you're working within a word limit. እና እሱም pressure ስለሚኖር የግድ through layers and layers of revision excess የሚሆኑ tangentially relevant የሆኑ ነገሮችን ማውጣት ያስፈልጋል. Okay, so how do you present work of others in a logical sequence? ቅድም እንዳልነው it could be by time, right? ለምሳሌ አንድ የሆነ የክሊኒካል ጋይዳንስ የወጣበት ታይም ይኖራል፣ እሱን ከተው ወስድ or you could organize the papers by the type of exposure or outcome they have looked at and found. So 1980s to 1990, because IQ test changed there, right? የሆነ policy change, የሆነ guidance change ስላለ ታረጋላችሁ። ከዛ በኋላ ደግሞ ያለውን ከቼንጁ በኋላ ያለውን, or it's because of the measure of how physical activity is measured in different studies. There is what we call heterogeneity. Different studies measure their variables differently. ስለዚህ self-reported የሆኑት with all the limitations of self-reporting በፒዶሜትር ወይም በአክሴለሮሜትር የተደረጉትን በተለያየ ፓኬጅ አድርጋችሁ, because you could show some trend for your reader and for yourself. ከዛ መጨረሻ ላይ ቅድም እንዳልነው የትራያል ዴታ፣ የኦብዘርቬሽናል ዴታ፣ ኳሊቴቲቭ ሪሰርች፣ ኬዝ ሪፖርት የመሳሰለ የሚሉትን በዛ ኦርጋናይዝ ማድረግ ይቻላል. Okay, so plan your review to avoid student drift. But the thing that I would actually emphasize on is layers of revision, right? And ተጽፎ የሚወጣ ነገር አይደለም. By proofreading, by going back to it, revising, you could smoothen እና ጥሩ እንትን ልትሰጡት ትችላላችሁ. Make the sections directly related to the objectives of your research, right? The way you organize your paragraphs. And the writing workshop ስንወስድ በጣም ከኔ ጋር የቀረ ምክር የሰጠን ትሬነር ነበረ እና what he said is, and this is the thing with academia, right? ይሄ unfolding የሆነ writing ብዙ አይወደድም አካዴሚያ ውስጥ. So you need to give the crux of your the gist of your argument in the first sentence of your paragraph, right? The first sentence should be the headline sentence. You summarize what that paragraph is about or what you want to say. ከዛ በኋላ ሜካኒዝሙን የተለያየ መንገዶቹን ኤላቦሬት የምታደርጉባቸው ናቸው። ከዛ በኋላ እና ኤዲት ስታደርጉ አለን ሰውየው, make sure that you're doing this with your paragraphs, right? Signposting የሚባል ኮንሰፕት አለ። ይሄ አሁን እንደ ፊክሽን አይነት አንፎልዲንግ የሆነ ሰርፕራይዝ እዚህ ጋር አይነት አካሄድ አይወደድም አካዴሚያ ውስጥ, because people are evaluating your work, whether to take it seriously or not take it seriously, whether to read further or to stop reading, whether it's of interest of good quality የመሳሰለው ነገር። ስለዚህ make sure when you are reviewing, review with a view of providing the headline sentences at the head of your paragraphs. ከዛ ደግሞ at certain points, you could even signpost. You could say, oh, I've covered these aspects, which are clearly related to your objectives. From this point on, I'll be covering this. The next section will cover this. እያላችሁ you give the reader, because ሁሌ you have to think about your markers, you have to think about your journal reviewers, and so forth, so that they, at least if they get it, if they understand what you've done, there is a big chance your paper will be accepted, even if with a big major correction and beyond. If they don't understand it, you are guaranteed to be rejected. You're guaranteed lower marks because it gets confusing. Be judicious with the use of headings, right? Too many headings, right? The headings and the subheadings needs to be meaningful, right? አንዳንዴ በጣም headings እና subheadings ስናበዛ እንትኑን ፍሎውን ይቆራረጥብናል። Okay, so ብዙ አወራን. Let's stop now, and I'll share with you an exercise. So here, this is taken from an actual literature review. Okay, so this is from a study looking at school nutrition intervention to decrease childhood obesity in low and middle income countries. Okay, so you need to have the topic or the research question or the aim. So with this aim, here ሆን ተብሎ ተዘበራርቋል ኦርደሩ. How would you order the flow of your literature review? What would you start with? So take the next 10 minutes or so to have a look, and order it. ቅድም ባልነው መሰረት ከየት ጀምራችሁ ከባክግራውንዱ የትኛው ነው መሆን ያለበት፣ ከዛ የመጨረሻው section of your literature review, so your whole introduction before you go to the methods, እንዴት ነው ordered መሆን ያለበት በእነዚህ 7 ፖይንቶች የሚለውን, if you can reflect over the next 10 minutes, and then we can discuss. Okay, so there are a few who've started with number 5 with the definitions. There is one who started with number 6. And there is one who started with number 2. Okay, so are there any more contributions? Okay, 2. 5, 4, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7. Okay, any more contributions? Okay, so just to settle the first one, you would start with number 2, right? So when you read research papers, do they start by a definition? They don't. They first start by outlining what they're talking about, the topic, the importance of the topic, and so forth, right? That's what happens. ከዛ በኋላ ነው critically important ሁሉንም ነገር አይደለም፣ በተለይ ሪሰርች ኩዌስችኑ ላይ implied የሆኑትን ነገሮች ዲፋይን ለማድረግ የሚሄዱት, right? Selected terms. ከዛ በኋላ so number 2 and then number 5. ከዛ በኋላ you describe and discuss previous research close to that of the researcher. Okay, so number 1 follows. I understand those of you who've said number 4. I understand. Again, number 1 follows. ይሄ ከምን አይነት ሴትአፕ ጋር ይሄዳል? አሁን አንዳንድ ከሴንት ፖል, those of you who've submitted your research to us as we are moderating and looking at your work, you could relate to what the structure I'm suggesting. that we go for number 1 and then we go for number 4, right? Because ይሄ biological ወይንም social mechanism-ን offer የምታደርጉት የተሰራውን ሪሰርች መጀመሪያ አውትላይን ካደረጋችሁ በኋላ ነው። ዩዥዋሊ እንደውም አንዳንዴ ከሊትሬቸር ሪቪው ሴክሽኑ በኋላ የራሱን የቻለ ኮንሰፕቹዋል ወይንም ደግሞ ባዮሎጂካል ሜካኒዝሙን ድራውት የምታደርጉበት ሴክሽን ሁላ ልትሰሩ ትችላላችሁ። ስለዚህ so the suggested one is number 2, number 5, number 1, number 1 እንትን ካደረጋችሁ በኋላ ከዛ እንደውም number 3 describing the local context which the research is relevant to, right? So እናንተ በምታጠኑበት ሴቲንግ እና ኮንቴክስት ውስጥ ያለውን ሪሰርች so ከነምበር 1 ሎጂካሊ ፎሎ የሚያደርገው ነምበር 3 ነው። ነምበር 1 ጀነራሊ ኤቪደንስ ቤዙ ምን ላይ ነው ያለው፣ ከዛ ደግሞ ኤቪደንስ ቤዙ when you are going to suggest your research ያለውን ታደርጉና ነው ከዛ በኋላ ወደ ነምበር 4 የምትሄዱት። ከዛ the rest is quite straightforward, right? ከዛ በኋላ ወደ ሪሰርች ኩዌስችን እና ሃይፖቴሲሳችሁን ሌይአውት ታደርጋላችሁ። እሱን ካደረጋችሁ በኋላ you would reference your own. You wouldn't talk too much about your methodology, but you would indicate, oh, this is it, and I'm going to ask this question, and then I'll be filling this gap by undertaking this type of research methodology. Okay, there is slight alterations. አሁን ቅድም number 4 መቅደም አለበት ያላችሁ ሰዎች after number 5 it can be there could be on different modalities እና በምትሰሩበት እንትን ውስጥ shift ይኖራል። ግን this is the more of common structure we see in published research. Again, alterations here and there ሊኖሩ ይችላሉ። more of የመጀመሪያ ላይ number 2 መጨረሻ ላይ 6 እና 7 ብዙ ጊዜ it's set. In between there can be differences. So I hope that is clear. If there are any questions, please share your questions, and we'll move on. Okay, so how do you show your critical evaluation within your writing? Go beyond simple description. Of course, describe what you rate, your main findings, your conclusions, and provide summaries. But you have to understand that you need to go beyond that. Okay, so you describe what you're reading, but you have to understand that your reader, it's not like you're writing an interesting essay. You're actually delivering on work that is expected to be analytical. So you have to go beyond that. You have to appraise the information by drawing on the strengths and limitations of your studies. And you can use appraisal checklists, such as the critical appraisal skills program. They have a number of checklists. You can visit their website. ሌሎችም checklists አሉ for each methodology, but if this is a widely known appraisal tool, so you could go to the website, you could explore. So if you're trying to pick holes in some of your randomized control trials, there are forms that they've developed specifically for randomized control trials, checklists, systematic review checklists, qualitative cohort study have their own checklists. ሁሉም ግን all the checklists start by asking whether the authors have, okay, let me ask you this question. If you're evaluating a piece of work, what do you think the checklist would start by asking? የመጀመሪያ የምትጠይቁት ጥያቄ ምንድን ነው የሚሆነው? የመጀመሪያው ጥያቄ when you're evaluating, appraising a paper, what is the first thing that you'd evaluate it as part of a quality criteria? What is the first thing that you'd be interested in knowing? say you'd have like 12 questions, people. Yes, thank you, Yoel. If the research answers the question, right? But to be specific, right? The objectives, right? To be specific, if there is a clearly crafted research question, okay? Clearly communicated የሆነ research question አለ ወይስ የለውም የሚለው የመጀመሪያ yes no የሚለው ከዛ ነው ቼክሊስቱ የሚጀምረው እና ዩዥዋሊ የነዚህ አፕሬዛል ቼክሊስቶች ምንድን ነው የሚሆነው you do like so your research question on clear rational አስቀምጠዋል ወይ is another question ከዛ በኋላ ወደ ሜቶዶሎጂያቸውን አፕሬዝ ወደ ማድረግ ትሄዳላቸው methodology ላይ የመጀመሪያ question የምትጠይቁት is the methodology appropriate for the research question now for each of them ይሄንን ነው you can go in and look at the different forms this is what they do ከዛ በኋላ they ask you questions about they ask you questions about the sample size about you know randomization if it's a clinical trial about blinding, about all measures of rigor የሚባሉት እነዚህ reliability, validity, generalizability ከሚባሉት ኮንሰፕቶች ተነስተው በዛ ሬት እንድታደርጉ so usually እነዚያውን systematic review የሚሰራ ሰው በጣም exhaustively የሚጠቀምባቸው checklists ናቸው but you could also use it when you're writing your literature reviews right so it would incite ideas for you to give you an idea of what critical points you can generate to inculcate some critical perspective in how you write your literature review. So please explore and visit the website. So strengths and limitations are linked to the study design. Has the study been well conducted with the study restraints in terms of its design in mind, right? So ለምሳሌ አሁን አንዳንድ study cross-sectional study ሰርተው generalize ሲያደርጉ ግን if they talk about causality አይነት ነገሮች you know this leads to this causes this አይነት ነገር ካሉ so you would critique them or sample size በጣም እንትን ከሆነ oh yes it's shown effect it's shown significant association but the confidence interval is too broad ልትሉ ትችላላችሁ because it's not a well powered study it's a small sample size and everything else the study population type because you want people to contrast with what you're proposing and your target population exposure biases and generalizability, right? So ለምሳሌ አሁን ቅድም ስናወራ እንደነበረው በፒዶሜትር እና በሰልፍ completed reported የሆነ ዴታ መካከል የባያዝ ዲፍረንስስ አሉ አይደለ? የሪኮል ባያዝ፣ የሶሻል ዲዛይራቢሊቲ ባያዝ፣ የባያዝ አይነቶቹንም እዚህ ዲስከሽን ውስጥ you can incorporate. And you would also talk about the scope of past studies, right? So again, you're doing this in order to find pockets for proposing and justifying your research, right? Whether the studies are too focused, whether they have been too broad and you are bringing some focus to it, whether they have been excluding certain populations and you are providing evidence for those excluded populations, assume interest, okay? So Aviart is an author who's written this work through reference in Dionactuno Zigametout. So she has this work doing a literature review in health and social care. Swamit Makrodemo to generate these critical perspectives. Where did you find the information? ለምሳሌ you know published የሆነ data እና grey literature እንዴት ነው የምታዩት? You know how the author has reached their conclusion, methodology on አብሮ ማየት, when was it written, key message ምንድን ነው, right? And who has written this? አንዳንዴ conflict of interest pharmaceutical companies publish ያደረጉትን ነገር with context ማቅረብ ኢምፖርታንት ሊሆን ይችላል right conflict of interest ይኖራል የመሳሰለ ነገር and so forth so you need to read beyond ዝም ብሎ summarize descriptively summarize ማድረግ ብቻ ሳይሆን you need to bring a critical lens to how you access and discuss so also pay attention to the subtle meaning of words and use of them use them to your advantage right as you discuss ማለት ነው ስለዚህ so and so claimed ልትሉ ትችላላችሁ so and so alleged ልትሉ ትችላላችሁ concluded discovered examined dilutes displays builds confesses confuses and position and so forth እና አንዳንዶቹ words have negative connotation positive connotation and neutral stance ሊያንጸባርቁ ይችላሉ so as a reflection ከነዚህ ውስጥ more negative የሚባሉት የትኞቹ ናቸው በቻት ሼር ማድረግ ይቻላል dilute right so clearly no confuse clearly is negative what else allege I would agree EOL allege claim would be more neutral I would say allege kalachu it's like you're giving this impression that you don't actually believe in it necessarily but this is an alleged thing there isn't substantive evidence necessarily alone this is alleged in the malet no discovered is more neutral examined is more neutral displays could even be positive builds is very positive and so forth okay so and so about highlighting things ideas theories and hypotheses right so as you progress you're progressing towards your research question as we discussed right you're progressively trying to arrive at your research question having justified the research question እና እየወጡ የሚመጡ ለምሳሌ ሃይፖቴሲስ ቴስቲንግ የሆነ ኔቸር ያለው ሪሰርች ከሆነ እሱን ክሊርሊ ሃይፖቴሲሱ ከዛ ጋር ነል እና አልተርኔቲቭ ሃይፖቴሲሱ ጋር የምትደርሱበትን ነገር ማምጣት አለባችሁ አንደኛው theoretical evidence-ን ማየት ጥሩ ነው to be mindful it's not just about empirical review so the theoretical literature አንዳንዴ guiding theoretical literature ለምሳሌ እንትን framework produce ልታረጉ ትችላላችሁ and that would make your work really valuable transferable ያደርገዋል because theory ማለት ምንድነው ከempirical evidence accumulate እያደረገ ሲመጣ መጨረሻ ላይ ዳብሮ በቲዮሪ መልክ የሚወጣ ነገር ማለት ነው so ለምሳሌ አሁን health behavior ሊሆን ይችላል አሁን የhealth behavior health belief model አለ በሰፊው የሚታወቅ theory of planned action አለ there is nudge as a theory there are different theoretical models አሉ health behavior እና so theoretical modelu ምን ይላል because ለምሳሌ አንዳንዴ በመረጥነው ዴታ ሴት ሊሚትድ ልንሆን እንችላለን የምንመርጣቸው ቫሪያብሎች ዴታ ሴቱን እኛ ዲዛይን አድርገን ኮሌክት ካላደረግን ዴታ we are already limited ቅድም ዳውን ከሴሽኑ በፊት ከሰብለ ጋር እያወራን ነበርና so ብዙ የምንሰራቸው ስተዲዎች ሰከንደሪ ዴታ ላይ ቤዝ ያደረጉ ከሆኑ if we don't have an option to design the data that's to be collected we will be constrained by the available data right ግን possibility ካለ to supplement the secondary data with primary data or if we're planning especially if we're planning primary data collection review of the conceptual basis or the theoretical basis is so important right እና ምንድነው የምታደርጉት ያንን ስታደርጉ አሁን ለምሳሌ health belief model self efficacy የሚል construct አለው right so if someone is self efficacy ካለው has the means the skills to protect themselves from different health hazards የሚል concept አለው the perceived susceptibility የሚል concept አለው አሁን እነሱ ሜጀር የሚደረጉበት ቫሪያብል በኋላው ፐርሰናላይዝ አድርጋችሁ ወደ questionnaire ወይ ወደ ሆነ ነገር ስትቀይሩት የራሱ implication ስላለው having a view of those dimensions is important and would make your work comprehensive so አንዳንድ ያስገባችሁ ተማሪዎች የሴንት ፖል ለእኛ ኢቫሉዌሽን ባዮሎጂካል ሞዴሎችን ፓቶፊዚዮሎጂ የተመሰረተ ስተዲ ከምታደርጉት ነገር አንጻር ድሮ አድርጋችሁ ቢኮዝ ኦፍ ዲስ የዚህንና የዚህን ሪሌሽንሽፕ ብላችሁ ያነሳችሁ አላችሁ እና ዩ ጌት ኤክስትራ ማርክስ ዩ ጌት acknowledgement for that, or you get more acceptance, and now that is really, really good practice ለማለት ነው። Right? So specific issues related lack of validated assessment tools, right? ማንሳት ያለባችሁ ነገሮች ለምሳሌ validated የሆነ assessment tool ከሌለ, if there is no argument, consensus ከሌለ በኤሪያው እሱን highlight ማድረግ አለባችሁ, and ethical considerations and so forth. So we're coming to the referencing, right? So as we said, try citing the original source. ለምሳሌ አሁን የሆነ ፔፐር ላይ የሆነ ሶርስ ሳይት ተደርጎ ያን ኢንፎርሜሽን ከሌላ ሰከንደሪ ሶርስ ካገኛችሁ try and find the original source and cite properly. Use referencing software. ብዙዎቹ አሁን Mendeley, RefWorks ምናምን ነፃ ናቸው. They are very effective. They are very so don't do your bibliography manually. But it's a slippery slope. It's a very makes things very complicated. Later on, and ነገር ስትቀይሩ ሳይቴሽናችሁ ላይ ከእንደገና ዘይዳችሁ manually arrange ማድረጉ it's time consuming and error prone የሆነ process ነው. So start using your referencing software from the word go. Now acceptable የሆነ either Vancouver or Harvard style መከተል ነው። ቅድም ያልኩት the more important aspect thoroughly reference ማድረግ, thoroughly cite ማድረግ, right? So simply at the end of a paragraph, at the end of a section cite ማድረግ will do no good. You need to cite as you go along. So your እንትኖች ናቸው እነዚህ approaches ናቸው. Even like እንትን ከወሰዳችሁ certain phrases ከሆነ source directly ከወሰዳችሁ you should be aware እነዛን ቃላቶች እናንተ ስለፈለጋችሁ ፒክ ስላደረጋችኋቸው because they are potent and you can do that. Don't over ብዙ quotationዎች መጠቀም ጥሩ practice አይደለም, ግን you can deploy quotations. አንዳንድ መተካት የማትፈልጓቸው the author has said it well, you want to integrate those into your sentences, do that by all means. But when you do that, it needs to be in quotation within your sentence. ያችን ለይታችሁ quotation አድርጋችሁ at the end of the sentence you need to provide the citation along with the page number, so that's ሰዎች ሄደው ማረጋገጥ እንዲችሉ. This is really important. So integrate short quotations. For the longer ones you can use their own indent አድርጋችሁ በራሱ paragraph. Okay, so ለምሳሌ አንዳንዴ long quotations ሊሆኑ ይችላሉ የወሰዳችኋቸው እና መሃል ላይ ስታሰካኩ like dot ልታደርጉ ትችላላችሁ, ግን አንዳንዴ እንትን ስታደርጉ flow ከተበላሸ የሴንቴንሱ you can insert your own words, ግን when you do that ይሄ hard bracket የሚለውን ማስገባት አለባችሁ ማለት. This is so important, like falling foul of referencing citations, not attributing source properly. በቃ direct rejection ሊሆን ይችላል። ከዛም ባለፈ ደግሞ ሌሎች accusationዎች የplagiarism እና የመሳሰለው አይነት ነገር ሊያመጣ ይችላል። Like nowadays eternity የሚባል የplagiarism check softwareዎች አሉ and everything. Whatever you have borrowed from elsewhere immediately highlight አድርጎ ነው የሚያመጣው. So you can never be too careful, and it's academic good practice anyway. So let's see, the summary for today is avoid unnecessary digressions, avoid too much descriptive approach to your literature review. You need to enhance the analytical value of your literature review. Pay attention to structure in the ways that better proofread and edit in the ways that we discussed. Signpost matter. At times do state the obvious when the result is critical for you. Always have in mind that you're doing all this literature review to actually justify your research question. ስለዚህ ከዛ አኳያ important ሲሆን you can state the obvious and say this is a surprising finding, right? And so forth. And avoid too many low quality sources. It's not to mean that you have to fill all your literature review by high RCTs and everything. Then selection actually you need to be judicious. ምን አይነት studies ነው mobilize እያደረኩ ያለሁት የሚለውን አንድ ያላነሳነው ነገር ምንድነው? summarize ማድረግ is so important. summarize ማድረግ ማለት ብዙ ጊዜ ተማሪዎች ጋር የምናየው ነገር ምንድነው? descriptive መሆን, one by one describe ማድረግ. Okay, oh, there was this study in Ethiopia in 19 and it said this. And then the next study came in 19 so forth and then it did this. እያሉ መቀጠል, right? በጣም አድካሚ ነው ለአንባቢ and they don't get the gist of so what summarized ሆኖና ቅድም ባልናቸው መሰረቶች ለምሳሌ በኤክስፖዠሩ አይነት በአውትካሙ አይነት ሊሆን ይችላል በታይም ዲፍረንስ ሊሆን ይችላል summarize አድርጋችሁ not one by one ለምሳሌ the main point the main finding of those studies ታወጡትና ለምሳሌ RCTዎች አንድ 3 RCTዎች ከሆኑ ሪዛልታቸውን የሚስማማ ሪዛልት ካላቸው the RCTs have found positive effect ይሉና ታስቀምጡና then what you would do is when you cite those papers 3-4 citation ታስቀምጣላችሁ ማለት ነው። ከዛ በኋላ the reason you would actually discuss individual papers is to illustrate, to elaborate, to give an example. Right? This is so important. I hope this is getting across. Right? So you first provide the summary, the key finding. ከዛ በኋላ ነው እያንዳንዱን study discuss ወደ ማድረግ መሄድ ያለባችሁ እና you need to move away. All of us fall into that habit of describing one by one. So when you proofread, when you edit, you need to see how you're የተጨመቀ ነገር provide ለማድረግ እንዴት summarize እንደምታደርጉ ማለት ነው። So this is actually an addition that I thought I would provide based on ከሴንት ፖልም ፔፐሮች ስናይ ባለፈውም ጥቁር አንበሳም ፔፐሮች ስናይ ፊድባክም ያስፈልገዋል እኛም ኦቨር ታይም things that we picked up ብለን ያሰብነው ነገር the care we give to how we craft the statement, the aim statement ከዛ በኋላ ኦብጀክቲቮቹ so እሱም በተመለከተ የተወሰኑ pitfalls አሉ in terms of how aims are stated. So the aim statement is literally the research question stated as a statement, right? So broad ነው የሚሆነው ማለት the main objective of the main purpose of the paper ነው የሚሆነው ከዛ objectives have to be specific and distinct steps within the research journey. ብዙ ጊዜ የምናየው ፕሮብለም ምንድነው አንዳንድ ኦብጀክቲቮች ኤሙን ኦልሞስት ሪስቴት የሚያደርጉ ኦብጀክቲቮች ይሆናሉ or your objectives might be even broader than the aim በጣም confusing ነው የሚሆነው right? So make sure that these are carefully crafted. Let's see an example, right? So this is an example from one student paper in Yaga to determine how the examination period influences eating behavior amongst Imperial College London first year students in Aladal. So the exam period እና በኢቲንግ ቢሄቪየር መካከል ያለውን ሪሌሽንሽፕ ኤክስፕሎር ለማድረግ ነው right? So አሁን አንዳንዴ to objective ይባልና restating the very aim in different words ይሆናል or ከዛም ደግሞ broader የሆነ to see the effect of ምናምን የሚል objective ይጨመር. We need to be very careful and curate the objectives very closely. or አንዳንዴ ደግሞ ስለ ፖሊሲ ኢምፕሊኬሽን ማውራት ይጀመራል objective ውስጥ, right? So we need to be very disciplined. Look what happens in terms of the objectives drawing on this aim. So the first one, to develop an appropriate instrument to identify eating behavior, right? So the student was thinking about primary data collection, survey ማድረግ, ተማሪዎችን questionnaire መበተን ነበረ. ግን ያ questionnaire either develop ማድረግ አለባቸው or they have to identify a valid questionnaire that will measure this idea of eating behavior, right? That by itself is an objective, but clearly that objective is subsumed within the aim, right? So ያንን structure in the pyramid, aimu at the apex ነው የሚሆነው. Everything that comes underneath is a specific step of an objective that falls within the aim, right? About specifying the exam period, because there are so many exams. Which exam period? እሱ ራሱ አንድ objective ነው የሚሆነው, right? Measure the eating behavior both in and out of the exam period. ስለዚህ questionnaire-ን በትኖ አስሞልቶ ኤኑሜሬተር የሚደረግም ከሆነ እነዛ ታስኮች ሁላ በዚህ ኦብጀክቲቭ ውስጥ ይካተታሉ። sample recruitment and objective ሊሆን ይችላል. I would say an additional objective that might be missing is the synthesis aspect. እሱን ኢንዲኬት የሚያደርግ ኦብጀክቲቭ ሊጨመር ይችላል። ስለዚህ the main thing is around ኦብጀክቲቫችን በዚህ በኤም ውስጥ subsumed የሚሆን actually thinking about the critical steps within the research process አድርጎ ማካተት ይጠይቃል የሚል ነው. We've come to the end of our session and very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Enoch. So that was a very interesting and engaging session. And I believe the knowledge and practical strategies that you've shared during the webinar has provided our audience with valuable tools and techniques to enhance their literature review skills. So once again, thank you very much for that. So having said that, we'll directly proceed to the post-CME quiz. So there are 4 MCQs. You'll be given around 10 minutes to attempt them. So just to reiterate, you need to be able to score 50% or more in order to be certified. So please attempt the quiz. So by the end of the post-CME quiz, you can directly proceed to the Q&A.
All right. So, Doc, we have received some questions from the Q&A, most of them which you have already answered, which I have responded to as you were delivering the stations. We have few questions which have been coming up. So 2 of the questions are more of AI related and plagiarism related. So the first question asks what you would recommend the literature review. What would you recommend the literature review you wrote by rephrasing it using AI, considering we're not adept in good academic writing skills? Is it considered plagiarism if you cited each literature review? That's one of the questions. And related to that, I think you can also answer the most recent question that we have gotten on this issue. What are your opinions and general advice on the use of AI and research and literature reviews?
Isabella, I think you guys are going to get me into trouble. AI is a headache in academia, as you all know, and academia is still figuring out how to work within the frame of AI. So, it's now ubiquitous. We all have access to it and people use it. We all know, but what is proper usage in Milano, like everything else, right? So if you're using it to explore your ideas at first, then that should be fine. But if you are using it to produce your review for you and your writing, then that's a difficult and problematic area. So if it's detected, እንደውም ትላንትና ትዊተር ላይ ያየው የነበረ some researchers submitted like ChatGPT ሲጠይቁት, oh, here's the response to your question ብሎ ካለው ጋር ለሰብሚሽን ለጆርናል ልከውት የተያዙ ሰዎች አሉ. So when they were editing out when they were editing, they didn't edit out your chat GPT, ለእነሱ የሚያወራውን ኮንቨርሴሽንም ጨምረው እዛ ውስጥ በዛ የተያዙ ሰዎች አሉ። So that's so it's a gray area. There are no simple answers with that. Again, what I would say is if you want to kind of issue an outline, understand the market, if you want to ask the AI at first, then that I think is okay. But when you're actually drawing out your final writing, it should be you. Not just because it's wrong. There is so many perspectives to say that it's not as effective at producing the final work output. Especially, it might give you a pass mark. It will never be like, you know, once you've invested on the work, citation, mulu citation, and I don't know, any explore ያደረኳቸው anyway. ስለዚህ ጥንቃቄ ያስፈልጋል ነው generally ምለው ነው።
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if participants who have sent us these questions, if you don't feel that it hasn't been answered, or if there are further questions because you got that you want to ask, you can also send it on the Q&A or in the chat box again, okay? And thanks for the questions and for the amazing response, Joe. We have one other request. Is there any free or any plagiarism checker that you recommend us to use?
I don't know, actually. Then I am sure as I would Google that. I'm sure if there is something out there, maybe if the others know. Here in the college, Turnitin የሚባል software አለን. So all our student works go through Turnitin. እና እያንዳንዱን ቴክስት ሃይላይት አድርጎ ያወጣል። ሚስ አያደርግም almost. So it could be a student paper submitted in Indonesia. As long as it's electronically submitted, it will pick it up. ሁለት ሴንቴንስ ልትሆን ትችላለች። እና የአካደሚክ ሚስኮንዳክት ኮሚቴ የሚባል አለን። በዛ እንደዛ ዲቴክት የተደረጉ ተማሪዎች ካሉ ሲሪየስ የሆነ ሳንክሽን በዛ ሀፕን ያደርጋል። So the lesson is like when you're submitting to journals, they will run it because they don't want to go into that trouble. And if you're implicated, if anyone is implicated, በዛ ሲሪየስ ነው የሚሆነው። ግን I'm sure there must be some other softwares out there እና የምታውቁ ሰዎች ካላችሁ እዚህ ሼር አድርጉ please በቻት and I would actually just do a general Google search. I'm sure there things will come up.
Thank you so much. Plagiarism checker. We have plagiarism checkers. We have AI checkers for the use of AI in doing literature review or in any research activities or even in any paper that you submit as well. So check those things out because like in applications, in paper submissions, this is what like some companies or some of those people who go through your profile can also check that. And that could have an impact as well. And thanks for the question and the response once again. We have one other question. The question asks, is the study question relevant to my research? So I think on this question, maybe you can touch up on how picking the study question could affect the literature review or on conducting the study a little bit.
Yeah, I think I saw this come in. I think this is about the appraisal. I believe this was when we were discussing the appraisal, right? Appraisal ከሚደረጉት ነገሮች አንዱ ምንድን ነው የሚለውን ዲስከስ ስናደርግ ይመስለኛል. This contribution came in. So this came in saying that we need to check that the study question is relevant to the research. That's how I understood it. I don't know if it's a question. I don't understand it as a standalone question. Then maybe the person could elaborate for us. I don't know.
You're right, Dr. Enoch. It was actually
yeah, I remember.
Yeah, you also touched it up like as you were discussing it. Okay. Another question we have from the Q&A section is we have an attendee who asked us the difference between aim and specific objectives. Aim versus objective. What is the difference? Are they the same? Is one specific or the other general? So maybe touching up on that.
That's a really good question. So the difference between aim and objectives, right? Right? Yeah. So that's very important, critical, right? So the aim is essentially your research question stated as a statement, right? So research question, what is the corner? The aim becomes to explore, so to investigate, to examine. ተብሎ በስቴትመንት መልክ በኦብጀክቲቭ ስቴትመንት አይነት ይጻፋል። ግን it's the main aim። በቃ ከዛ ሰፊ ምናየው ነገር የለም። It's the core focus. Objective is a breakdown of the aim into specific objectives. So ቅድም እንዳልነው it could be about, in order to achieve the aim, in order to find the relationship between ቅድም ካየነው example ጋር between school nutrition programs and obesity ምናምን ያልነው, right? In order to find that out, maybe you would need to develop an instrument to measure, your exposure variable. So that becomes identifying or developing the instrument, the questionnaire or whatever becomes one of the objectives. So it's a subset of the aim, it's contributing to the aim. And then the analysis becomes another objective, right? It's so important not to confuse the aim and the objective and not to broaden the objectives beyond that.
Thank you so much. So far, I believe that the questions have been addressed. If there are any further questions, so these are the questions that we have received so far, and thanks for the great responses. We really appreciate the whole webinar and the whole discussions that we have held. I believe most of our questions have been answered. If there are any further questions, please forward. Okay. So we received one more question. When I asked the question about AI, I was implying that rephrasing a sentence so that it would make sense, since we're not good enough in writing it. So considering this, is it plagiarism? So I think this question is asking rephrasing sentences and while conducting,
Yeah, very good question. And again, ትንሽ መርኪ የሆነ area ነው የAI area, right? So እኛም as educators were not very clear. ግን አሁን በቅርብ ጊዜ የተረዳሁት people are distinguishing between generative AI እና reactive AI. Right? So if you are asking it to generate content, it's actually more serious. Right? ግን አሁን እንደተባለው, if you are actually asking it for grammatical fixes in your work, it's not that serious. Right? So አሁን ለኔም ለማንሰር ለመመለስ የሚከብደኝ ምንድነው የኢንስቲትዩሽናችሁ አካዴሚክ ፖሊሲ ይወስነዋል. Right? Because people are using it right and left. And people are using it. It's out there. It's a resource. So መጀመሪያ ላይ የነበረው ለAI resistance አሁን necessarily የለም, because practical አይደለም, because we know people use it. ግን so I think ያኛው reactive AI ውስጥ በሚለው ይካተታል. And I know a lot of there are a number of institutions which allow that usage. አንዳንድ ኢንስቲትዩሽኖች ምን ይላሉ, even if you generate the content, because you'd have to review it and fix any flaws it might have, you'd have to incorporate the AI contribution into your own work. It's allowed ሚሉ አሉ እሱንም ራሱ ማድረግ, ግን you have to reference the areas where you brought in the AI. So የኢንስቲትዩሽናል ፖሊሲዎቹ ራሳቸው የጠራ አይደለም at this point in time. It's quite
Thank you so much once again.
Yeah, አንዲት ሰብለ አንዲት ጥያቄ አለች ቅድም የመጀመሪያ የመጣችው, where should we read the result section? እንትን ብናለው ብዬ ተውኩት ነበረ. Should we read the result section when we write the literature review or the whole paper? Whether መሰለኝ, whether we should read the result section or the whole paper, considering that we have limited time. And ሌላ ሴሽን ራን ማድረግ የፈለኩት የነበረው, as you know ሰብለ, is when we're discussing the past few days how to read a paper ምትል ሴሽን ናት, እና እዛ ላይ የሆነች ኦተር የምትለው ነገር አለ, የሆነ ሪሶርስ አላት. ከየት ነው መጀመሪያ ያለባችሁ ራሱ ስታነብ? right? እና አሁን እዚህ ጋር ለተጠቀሰው ነገር the abstract is the best thing. The abstract is the best summary, right? You shouldn't go to the result section directly. That would be wrong, I would say, right? So the thing that you should do is like read the abstract, because the abstract should have all the key aspects of the paper, right? So abstract to life, irrelevant kahone, you shouldn't read more, right? Abstract to life, relevant on systematic reviews and go. So we find maybe 500 papers that come out in terms of the initial search engine search scenario, right? ከዛ እነሱን ካታሎግ እናደርግና አንድ ባንድ ቼክ ስናደርግ መጀመሪያ ታይትላቸውን ቼክ እናደርጋለን for relevance። ሁለተኛው ስቴጅ ምንድነው? ስክሪኒንግ ይባላል፣ right? ስክሪን የምናደርገው ሁለተኛው ደግሞ for relevance abstract ነው። If it's only once the abstract satisfies our interest and the relevance criteria that we go to the full paper reading. So resulቱን ግን በተናጠል ማንበብ I think is problematic.
Thank you so much for addressing that.
I would actually argue, sorry, Sabla, again, I've got a question. I would actually argue reading the discussion section, if at all, and section, reading the discussion section could be more informative. Because the discussion section will start with a summary of the key results. ከዛ በኋላ ደግሞ will put the results in wider context. ከዛ ደግሞ የራሱን ሪሰርች ደግሞ strengths and limitations ዲስከስ ያደርጋል የፔፐሩ, right? The discussion section, that's what it does. ስለዚህ it can give you a holistic overview of what the paper is all about.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a very good question, and thanks for bringing it here. We have one more. You touched it up a little bit, but maybe if you want to add something on that, I'll just raise it here. How much citation is allowed on the literature review, as we're going to leave some for the discussion part? So how would you know what to put in the discussion and literature review in terms of the weight of articles?
Yeah, I think I did address this
one. You have addressed it. Okay.
I have addressed it, yes.
Right. So these are the questions that we have for today. Do not forget to fill out the quizzes that you have been sent. That's for where that we give you the certificates and the CEU points. So make sure that you have answered the quizzes that have been sent on the chat boxes. I believe it was a very productive discussion that we have had so far. Thanks so much all participants for staying with us. I'll give the stage to Tadaili once again.
Thank you very much, Sabla. Thank you very much, Dr. Heno Kazza.